when you buy a smart speaker or you use a smart doorbell or, all these different technologies, these things are collecting data that you may not know about. They may be collecting your location. And I think people, they get excited again about the innovation, but they may not think about the downside. So
thank you for accepting our invitation. I would like to tell you a little bit about what LawSikho, Skill Arbitrage, and Super Lawyer does. We have this 25,000 plus learners database. Other than that, we have a reach of more than 2.5 million readership over several blogs like iPleaders, LawSikho itself, then Skill Arbitrage, and Super Lawyer basically is trying to connect learners who are mostly first generation, and they are trying to make a space for themselves. Now I would love to introduce the data diva, Debbie Reynolds. I know her for more than a couple of years now, and we have virtually met several times. This was the opportunity I had to invite her to our show at Super Lawyer. I know her as the person who always talks about data ethics, global data enterprise, how it is working, what kind of privacy we should have. She always talks about jurisdictional privacy aspects. She has her own company, she runs it, Debby Reynolds Consulting, and she is in top 30 global cyber risk communicators, also in amongst top 10 global data privacy experts, and most important, #1 data privacy podcaster. That is how I know her. I would like to take forward this interview by asking her about herself, her journey, and how she became involved with this world of data privacy and the emerging technology which we see nowadays in several industries like edtech, fintech, education tech, biometrics, smartphones, whatnot. So please, Devi, welcome to our show. Please let us know how and what all you have been doing.
first of all, thank you so much, Divya, for inviting me to the show. I really appreciate it. You were a delight. I was happy to host you on my podcast. It's still a very popular episode. People still listen to it. It's very cool. So my journey into technology is very interesting. I am a technologist by trade, and privacy was just something that at the time when I started was more of a personal interest. So two things were happening at the same time in the 1990s. People started getting on to the commercial internet as we know it at around that time was being developed. I was helping companies with digital transformation. So my first work in technology, digital transformation was to help libraries move from card catalogs to databases. So that's kind of my first start there. But around that time, I was also really interested in what it meant for something to be private. So there was a book called The Right to Privacy that came out in 1995, I want to say. And Caroline Kennedy was one of the co-authors of that book. And it was about privacy in the US and about the legal rights that people have in privacy. And the thing that shocked me, actually, this is a book that my mother read and she bought and she thought was really interesting. And her interest got me interested. And it was all about what was private and what wasn't. And I think for me, being in the US, it was shocking because a lot of what we talk about, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and you think, for me, I thought privacy was like freedom, right? So to look at our laws and look at the gaps in the laws and see that privacy really isn't in the Constitution, it's not a fundamental human right in the US, that was like very shocking. And I was concerned about technology. And I thought, wow, so we're putting more stuff on the internet. We're more connected than we ever will be, was before. And I knew that technology, as it grew, that those privacy concerns would grow, which I was right. I would do these projects for corporations, all over the world. And I had to know like privacy laws. So it wasn't even a big deal. I just had to know it, right? Because it's like, okay, you want to move data, like for example, I had a project, financial data could move out of India. I couldn't see it. I wasn't in India. So, every morning and say, hey, what's happening? Because I can't like see the data or whatever with that project. But as I move a bit forward, people who at around the time that the EU was trying to update their data directive. So I'm very familiar with the directive. I have been doing like, standard contract clauses for years, for, decades, basically. Once the EU started thinking about updating their data directive with the GDPR, people started calling me from companies and they're like, hey, we know that you know this privacy stuff. Come talk to us, right? So one of the big companies that was the first one that called me and asked me to talk to them about privacy was McDonald's Corporation. So I talked to them and their corporate legal department, the whole department, about privacy. This is before GDPR came out, and they were just stunned about the extraterritorial reach of GDPR, what it could possibly mean for companies that even are in Europe, but they handle data of people who are in, the EU. And so after that, a couple years later, between that time, I talked a lot about GDPR and privacy in the US, and hardly anybody was talking about it. And eventually, PBS in the US contacted me to talk on the TV about GDPR. And that was, around the time that GDPR became a law. It was kind of cool. So yeah, that was kind of the start of my privacy only career. I still do a lot of work in digital transformation, and as a result, AI, get asked to speak a lot about that because a lot of companies want to implement that. And that's, my background is in that digital transformation space. And I'm like, hey, you can use data like this, not like this. Like it works like this, it doesn't work like that. So that's my story.
What is the most significant challenge that you think that organizations actually face when it comes to data privacy and understanding the changing landscape of the whole technological sphere? Because that's something which you always talk about, and that's something which companies look forward to learning how it works. And why is it that important to be compliant with all of this?
So companies need to be concerned, or the thing that they're concerned about is they want to move forward with these innovative technologies. And for the most part, they want to do it in a way that obviously they don't want to break laws, right? So they're very concerned about the laws that are coming out and whether they can comply with it and how much they need to change. But I think companies, I guess it's a twofold issue. So one is, what to them. So sometimes I feel like companies, they get overwhelmed by all the laws. They really need to take it down to like, what data you have, what data do you have of certain people, what are you doing with the data? Like all that applies in terms of figuring out what laws apply to you. So like when GDPR came out, people were like, really, oh my God, it's like, over 200 pages. It's these 99 clauses and stuff like that. But I'm like, well, not all that will apply to you based on what you're doing, right? So don't be overwhelmed by the laws and regulation, especially if not everything will apply to you. And then the other part is, how do the parts of the organization work together in a way that even if, let's say, we know on paper, okay, we need to do this, but then in terms of day-to-day operation, how do I know that I'm not breaking a law? How do I know that I'm not infringing on someone's right? How do I know that I'm not going to end up on the front page of someone's newspaper, right? So that those two things are really important. So it's the compliance part, and then there's the part about what you're actually going to do with the data, right? Because even if you do something with the data that maybe there isn't a law, customers still are concerned about how their data is handled. So that could be a bottom line issue where you lose customers because you're losing trust. So it's not just following the letter of the law, it's understanding what people expect in terms of how their data is being handled and how you as a company want to be seen in the public eye around that.
I would move forward and ask you to share some example about these trends or technologies that you believe will have a profound impact on the data privacy regime all around the world in near future. And also, would you tell the learners as in how to make themselves equipped with this kind of knowledge so that they can actually serve the better purpose, serve the companies if they feel like they want to advance in their careers? What would be your advice regarding that?
AI is the thing is definitely, that's the area that you worked on for many years. It's an area that I talk about, people ask me to talk about a lot. So many companies are infusing their application, their workflow, their operations in AI. And that's depending on how they're handling data, especially if they're handling data of personally identifiable people, that raises the risk for companies when they're dealing with privacy. So I've seen some companies like, let's close the door and not use AI. And it's like, well, that's not going to work because almost every application that you are using is putting AI in their tool. So then how are you going to deal with that? I think AI is very game changing for companies and they really need to rethink what they're doing. But part of that rethink is that companies, data is one of their greatest assets within their company, and it could be some of their greatest risks. So they need to really think about it on a holistic level. And I think the past way that organizations work, where it was like Santa's workshop and everyone had their own little thing that they did and everyone had blinders on, that just doesn't work in the AI age. So not that everyone knows everyone's job, but everyone needs to have a bigger picture idea of how data is handled within the organization. And if you don't, that's what the privacy people can bring, that more holistic viewpoint. Like, so you need to think about data from cradle to grave, right? From the beginning of how you get data to how it ends up in an organization. And a lot of companies in the past had only been concerned about how you receive data, right? Let's be like a hungry bear and collect as much data as you can, right? But then they never had a strategy for how you get rid of data. So we know that a lot of these privacy laws are saying, hey, what's your data retention? And a lot of companies get in trouble because they had historically never had to think about that. They just kept data forever, right? And so that's not the way of the world. And companies have to be more transparent than they ever did before. The second part of your question was about what people can do to improve themselves for what's happening with AI. I think, we're at the ground level. We're at the beginning of the beginning with AI in enterprises, the way that people want to use it now, where AI used to be like, companies will build AI systems and it was built for a particular purpose, right? And so now we're seeing all these general AI tools where like, hey, it has all these capabilities. So it gives people a wide range of things that they can do. And it's democratizing AI within organizations where it's not just AI where there's just one little thing that is, trained to do. You have these tools now that almost anyone, if they have a good imagination and a grasp of a tool, they can probably do things and imbue in their workflow with some type of AI capability. So I think what that does is it means that all of us need to become learners on our own about AI, right? So there are a lot of free resources out there. There are many articles. I read every day stuff about technology because that's, I'm a geek like that. That's my area. But anyone, I tell anyone, like if you even spent 10 minutes a day for 30 days, learning about AI, you probably know more about AI than almost anyone in your company, right? So take those opportunities, take the fact that there are riches of information that's out there that you can read about AI. There's AI tools that you can play around with, very inexpensive. Some are free, obviously, or very cheap that you can log in and, play around and see what it can do. I always put my privacy hat on. So I think, oh my goodness, like what is this? what is this new technology going to do in terms of privacy? You know, I'm always curious to look at what the new technology is, because eventually that technology, you'll be faced with it at some point, right? So knowing about the innovations that are happening in the AI space, you know, thinking about, well, what would happen if, if this tool had personal data, how would that, how would that impact the enterprise? So that's what I do. I'm very curious. I always like to look to see what is new, what's coming out, and then think about what the potential, not just the benefits, because that's all people like to talk about when they see a tool come out. They always talk about the benefit, but they don't really talk about the harm or the downside. So that's the thing that really interests me.
I really would like to understand, what does it mean to you if you when you were recognized as global top 30 cyber risk communicators, and the kind of reviews you get? How does it feel, and how have you reached that particular pinnacle of this career that you have chosen for yourself? I would say as a woman.
Oh wow. So as a woman, first of all, it has been tremendous. I decided many years ago that I wanted to have more of a presence, media presence for myself. So I just went about that in terms of doing the videos that I do every week and podcasts that I do every week. And it's been the response has been tremendous. I just did not expect it, right? So I get people reach out to me all the time, to ask me to do things or want to collaborate. And I love to talk to people all over the world. And I think that there needs to be more diversity in people talking about technology. And I find people like you, Divya, where maybe we as women, I feel like we don't necessarily get as many opportunities to be able to speak out and show our knowledge. We're even seeing this in a lot of AI talk in the US, where big publications are doing these big AI articles, and they're leaving out a lot of women who are in this space. So I think, for me, it's really important to be able to talk about people in different strokes of life, people in different jurisdictions. This is a human problem. So we have to think about it in a human way. And, I go out of my way to make sure that I have women on my show. So I've never, you never heard a month that I've ever had that just had all men on the show or all people in the US. Like I always mix it up because I think having all these different perspectives is very important, especially, for a lot of people who can't speak up, right? So being the voice of someone who maybe is underrepresented, someone who's marginalized in some way, I think it's very important to be able to have a voice there. When I receive these accolades, it's tremendous because it's like a lot of times I don't know some of the people who give me the accolades, and we get to know each other after a while. And to me, I always use it as an opportunity to also highlight the other people who are being touted for their expertise and get to learn from them. So to me, it's a great list because I get to look at the list like, hey, if I don't know that person, I'll reach out like, hey, we need to know each other. I need to follow you, need to learn more. So I think we need to be in a learning phase where we're always seeking out new ways to get new knowledge. And LinkedIn has been a tremendous source of information about people, about their expertise. There are certain people who you can always count on them to be able to put out something very informative. They want to share their knowledge. And as a result of them sharing, they get a big following and a lot of accolades follow. So I highly recommend people seek out those people. If you're interested in AI, seek out the AI people, the people who are posting about AI. If you're interested in privacy, seek out those people who are posting on privacy and talking about it. And definitely add your voice, for people who don't have a podcast or don't do a video or things like that. I tell people your comments are content as well, right? So being able to comment on a post that someone's made and give your point of view is just as important as people who are going, have a regular pattern of posting, details, information. So they make it easy, right? So you're not chasing down the information. So like I know today I saw a post from Jeff Jokic. He's in the US. He is a data wizard. That's what I call him. But he posted something today about ebooks, which I just had not ever seen. So it was about how ebooks, unfortunately, uh, because it's a digital product, is being used a lot for surveillance, and data brokers like take data about people based on ebooks. And I had not even heard of that. So how would I have known that, right? So the fact that he wrote about that, he posted an article that he had read about that. That's something I'm gonna read. I may even do a video about it in the future. But that to me is highly valuable. You have people who are thinking about these things, and these things may be things that people can use in their job right now, right? So there may be something that you're working on with a client, and you're like, hey, had you thought about X? Because you saw something that someone posted or you read an article. All those things keep your career fresh and new, and it actually helps you to understand what you're really interested in. So I tell people, even if you're in privacy, anyone who has a specialization, something they're really interested in with privacy, I think that makes them even that much stronger. So people say, I'm in privacy, but I really like AI. Or I have people say, I'm in privacy, but I'm interested in children's privacy. Not that you have to only do that, but I think that makes you stand out a lot more. Like people, like I have cyber people who know privacy, right? So you stand out because you're very different than the pack.
Now, moving forward with this point which you are raising about getting insight from so many posts, especially from LinkedIn and other social media, when print media is avoiding writing about women in AI and other aspects, and that too a very prominent print media. They recently missed out on writing about women. But how is it that you choose your topics and your audience, especially the people who you invite for your privacy podcast, which has made it #1 award-winning data privacy paid podcast, the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast? How have you built that niche for yourself? What made you pick those guests for your audience? What comes to your
Yeah,
mind when you're planning a topic?
that's such an insightful question. Thank you so much, Divya, for that. For me, before I started the podcast, I started doing videos, right? And so what I decided to do with my videos, because I work at the intersection of the technology and privacy, I would do something in the legal realm and privacy and then a technical. And that's what I do. So every week is one or the other, right? So that's like my pattern that I've been doing for over 4 years now, because that's where I play in that middle space. I do a lot of research, a ton of research, and I see something that catches my eye, I'll like flag it, and then I go back later and it's like, okay, will this have a long-term impact? If I talk about this, will it impact someone for the long term, or is it just a short-term thing? So I always pick the topics that I think have a longer term impact instead of the short-term impact. So like you never hear me, I never do videos where I say, hey, people are negotiating the AI Act. Like I would never do that, because to me, that's like, does that matter in 4 years from now? No. Like when it's final, I may do a video about it, then if someone can read it, like, years later. And that's how a lot of people still look at videos that I have like 4 years ago, right? Because like I'll give you an example. I did a video many years ago about adversarial attacks in AI, right? And nobody was talking about that back then, but everyone's talking about that now. So now when people talk about it, I say, hey, look at this video I did 2 years ago about adversarial attacks, because I thought that had a big long-term impact. But for the podcast, I just felt like I had to do a podcast because there are so many gaps in the way people talk about privacy, in my view. So a lot of times it's very, legalistic, it's very reactive about laws and regulation, but there's so much more happening in privacy than a law or regulation. So typically, unfortunately, laws and regulations are the result of something bad that's already happened, right? So I think for me, it's very important to be proactive. And when I thought about the first thing I did when I decided I want to do a podcast, I came up with a list of people I thought I would want on the podcast, and it was a list of 20 people. And then I was like, why do I want to talk to these 20 people? And I realized the thing that they had in common is that they are talking about those gray areas, those middle spaces that people aren't talking about, right? They're doing a lot of work in trying to communicate and educate people on these points that are more nuanced, more gray, um, not so black and white. And so that was kind of the start of the podcast. And then when I started podcasting, they said some of the articles I read said, well, if you invite people on the podcast, only like 30% of people would like say they want to do the podcast. So if you invite 10 people, only 3 people say yes. And so I invited 20 people because I wanted 6 people to say yes. And then I would do a podcast every other week. And then when I asked the first 20 people, 18 people said yes. And so I had 18 episodes within like 2 weeks. So that's how I started doing it every week. And so I am fortunate that people come to me. I'm always on LinkedIn and I'm like chatting with people and I think, oh my goodness, they have a really interesting career path, or they made like a really insightful comment, and I asked them on the show. I often, I don't know how many other privacy people do this, but I seek out people who are not in privacy too, because privacy is such a horizontal issue that impacts almost any part of the enterprise. I want to be able to see different perspectives of privacy. So you don't have to be a privacy person to be on the show. You just have to be able to give your point of view about privacy. And so that's how I do it. I'm blessed that I have, tons of people who want to be on the show, tons of people I want to have on the show. It takes a while to get, some of these people on the show, but I've been like really fortunate that the podcast has been very well received.
My next question will be obviously about you chairing IEEE committee and the kind of experience you had there and the initiatives which you are taking. And I'll tag along with that and understand your role as the member of IoT Advisory Committee, where you were appointed by US Department of Commerce in the year 2022. How have these been as experiences for you? And the kind of learnings which you had, how have you developed the whole criteria around it, that particular learning? Would you like to share that?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm a data person. So for me, when I'm thinking about doing a project, I think about it, not only about privacy, but like how does that data flow? Like how would that, impact a person? And I thought, IoT, in my view, is probably one of the biggest issues to me in privacy that a lot of people don't talk about. So when you buy a smart speaker or you use a smart doorbell or all these different technologies, these things are collecting data that you may not know about. They may be collecting your location, and I think people, they get excited again about the innovation, but they may not think about the downside. So I thought, well, this seems like an area that I can actually make an impact in. So I decided to work on these 2 projects. They're not the same, but they run in parallel in some way, right? So the IEEE effort is not just IoT, it's called connected systems, right? So basically anything connected to the internet, how do we think about privacy in those ways? What do people who implement or manufacture these technologies, what do they need to think about? So on that path, we're like, okay, we came up with a questionnaire that any company can use at any phase of their either development of a tool, implementation of a tool. Maybe they have something already in-house. They want to like hit the tires and ask those questions about the human-centric part of things. A lot of people don't understand is privacy is about a person, right? So if you don't have personally identifiable information of someone, then it really isn't a privacy issue. But a lot of these technologies are collecting that data. So for the IEEE project, which we're working on, and thankfully you're going to be part of our group to help us work through this question, we want to eventually be able to create almost like a nutrition label for connected devices, like IoT devices, around privacy. And so that's what we're working on right now on that with the Internet of Things Advisory Board, with the U.S. Department of Commerce. I'm part of a 16 board member team. We were selected. We were the only people in the U.S. on this team, so it's quite an honor to have this appointment. And so I lead the privacy part of that effort, right? So we are looking at how IoT devices impact privacy of people in different realms. So that could be any industry. I mean, we're talking about, agriculture, smart cities, cars, all types of things. So I'm very proud of the work that's happening there. We have a report that's actually going to come out in 2024 about all of our work that we're doing there. I guess in both of these efforts, the thing that I'm finding in the US especially is that, there are a lot of gaps there in terms of privacy. There are a lot of, spaces that have to be filled. And I think a lot of people in other countries, they say, well, why doesn't the US implement GDPR? Why can't the US be like India, make privacy a fundamental human right, right? And, our countries are different. And what I found is that you have to have a foundation to be able to build on to do these things, right? And so our foundation is, there are a lot of potholes, right? There are a lot of things that have to be filled in before we can actually have that foundation to be able to build upon. So, my goal is to find where those holes are, find where those gaps are, fill those gaps so that we can actually have like a smooth pavement so that we can move forward.
How did you make place for yourself as a woman in a field which was, I would say, traditionally dominated by men? And what were kind of challenges that you had faced there? And then you had to advocate for diversity as well, and the kind of inclusion that we see now in tech industry that has happened over the years. What kind of challenges did you face with all these things and being in the center of it and talking about it? How was your experience? And I will again club another aspect to it, that there are many a times that people point out, especially tech people, that why do we need ethics, why do we need laws? It is there in place, we will take care of it later, first we have to, let's develop. So why do you think that legal industry is also important to support equally the tech industry, so that we have a seamless and problemless, I would say, society in technology?
So just about being a woman in tech, I've had a lot of very good mentors. A lot of them have been men, and they've been very supportive of me, in my career. I've sought, I guess two things I could tell people, seek out a mentor. Find someone who's where you either want to be, or, I like to have mentors that aren't even in my industry, right? Someone has a leadership position in somewhere else, because you can apply, the things that they've learned in your job. And then another thing I tell people, and this to me applies especially to women, everyone, women and men. But, let's say you work really hard, you worked all night, you did all the stuff or whatever, for your company. No one really cares about that. You cannot wait for someone to open a door or to give you like an accolade or something. You have to stand up on your own. You have to tout your own work. You have to open your own doors. You have to make a door. Okay. If there is not a door, make one. If there's not a window, make one. So I think a lot of the attention that I've gotten is because I have stood up for myself. And I found out that people are not going to tell your story the way that you can tell it, right? So it's very important that you have your own voice, that you have your own story. And I think with social media today, it's easier than it's ever been. I remember back when I published my first article about 25 years ago. It was in a law publication, and it was like, okay, someone that I knew the editor who, had asked me to write this article or whatever. But if I didn't have that connection, I couldn't do that, right? And so that's the way things were before social media and stuff like that. Now anybody you can do your own posts, you can do your own show, you can do whatever you want, but find a way to get your voice out there, get your ideas out there. There will be people as soon as this is a situation where it's like build it and they will come, right? So if you're putting your information out there, you're putting your thoughts and ideas out there, people who resonate with that will support you. They'll come, say, hey, oh, Divya, oh, you're excellent. We want you to be on this project with us and be open to those opportunities. I have a situation where, and I don't know why this is, like, let's say, for instance, let's say if I ask 5 men to be on my podcast, all 5 will say yes. And let's say if I ask 5 women, maybe only 1 will say yes. And then it may be a toss up if that woman would actually follow through and do the podcast. So I go way, way out of my way to make sure that I have women on the podcast. And so sometimes I hold back episodes just to make sure I have enough women on the show. So it's not just all men, it's not all US or whatever. So I go in hyperdrive to try to recruit people and make sure. And sometimes I've talked to people for months to get them on the show, unfortunately, right? But when they're on the show, they're really happy that they did it. They see why it's really important. So I think, from women's perspective, let your voice be heard. Stand up. Don't wait for someone else to tell your story. You can literally click on the internet and say what you want to say, right? If you want to put something out there, you can, even if you don't know what to say. Let's say you read an article you thought was really interesting, share the article. Say, hey, I think this is interesting because XYZ, and then ask the people what they think. And then the most important thing that people need to understand when you're getting your voice out there is that you need to engage with people, right? So don't ever post something, have people comment, and then you don't respond. Like, I always respond. No matter who puts something on my comment, I always respond to them, right? If I don't, you have to call me like, Debby, where are you at, right? Because that engagement is really important. Lets people know that they're heard, and you would just be surprised at how those conversations can turn out.
Lastly, I would request you to advise us and our learners and even organizations as in how to strengthen their efforts to get into data privacy regime. Learners, when they are entering, what kind of caution they should take care of, how they should learn, what kind of learning they should focus on, what should be their priority as an organization, what kind of criteria should be there to strengthen their data privacy efforts. I know these are 2 questions which are very big ones, but I am pretty sure that you'll be able to answer.
For the individual. So the individual who's interested in privacy, I think learning on your own, reading as much as you can about emerging technologies, because emerging technologies, that's where a lot of these privacy issues arise from, right? So if you're reading papers or if you're reading, news sites about these new technologies that people are coming up with, those are going to be the privacy problems that you're going to have to deal with in your organization. So the technology always outpaces the law. The law is very reactive. So you want to be proactive, right? And so in order to be proactive, you need to look and see what technologies are out there, what they're doing, think in your head about what can I do to make a difference in my organization around privacy if this thing should come up. And then for organizations, I think there's a change in how organizations need to think. So there needs to be more human centricity around data. So I think in the past, companies, they're like, okay, we'll take as much data as we can. We provide a service, and as long as the service we provide is great, then we don't have to tell people about what we do with their data. And those days are gone, right? So that's just past. That's not the future. So companies need to be more transparent. So they need to find a way to be transparent. They need to have a strategy in place for data from cradle to grave. They need to be able to show their progress over time. So part of that is around maturity. And then, ethics, we didn't get a lot into ethics, but ethics is very important. So ethics is the right thing you're supposed to do, even if a law doesn't exist. So if you're only looking at laws, you're not thinking ethically, right? Because ethics is more than just the law. And unfortunately, not all laws are ethical, right? So that could be a whole other show. But I think, you know, having that human centricity has to be key, and that has not been the case around data for a long time. But I think that the future will really rise up that human centricity need, and that is tied very closely to privacy. So if you're thinking about human centricity, you're thinking about transparency, you're thinking about not only, consent of users or a legal basis for using data, or, uh, human rights of privacy, rights around people's data, rights around how their data is used. So if you're thinking along those lines, you're going with the flow of the river, you're not swimming upstream, right? So I think that, as long as we as individuals and we as companies need to really be thinking about the ways that we need to bring more human centricity into our work. And the more we do that, the better we'll be in terms of compliance down the line.
We thank you again from LawSikho, Super Lawyer and Skill Arbitrage, for attending our session and enlightening us with all your thoughts.
Thank you so much. You've been such a darling, and it's been amazing to see, your growth, and, helping to support you in the work that you do is tremendous. So I'm really happy about that.